Good afternoon and welcome to Forfar Academy, where it is our pleasure and delight to see our friend Haifa Segan from Seattle back in school working with our young people. Haifa is an artist who has visited Scotland now and Forfar Academy for the past 5 years. His work is fascinating, interesting, very thought-provoking, as well as challenging for our young people. Haifa focuses on hate crimes, intolerance, and there is a particular focus in his Under the Wings of God series over the past 20 years in trying to keep alive the memory of the Holocaust and to bring young people to an awareness of Holocaust and hate crimes through the art which he does. This afternoon, Haifa is being interviewed by one of our senior pupils, Luthais McCash. I hope you find the interview interesting, I hope you find it thought-provoking, and above all, I hope it reflects the work which Haifa is keen to do as an artist educator, promoting the memorial and memory of Holocaust for young people in a way which is both stimulating, practical and accessible. So I'll pass over to Luthais now to ask the artist some questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Haifa, you were brought up in America and you went to art school in America about the age of 30 as a mature student, yeah?
22 to 30, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when studying art, when you got your MFA, your Master of Fine Arts, you were looking at projects to do with things like the Holocaust, yeah? Or was that kind of an extension?
Not really. I was doing a lot of different art at the time, but I did happen to do 2 responses to the Holocaust. My first 2 works in my late 20s when I was in graduate school. One of them I did after reading Elie Wiesel's Night, his classic memoir that he wrote around, I think, 1956 or so. Elie Wiesel's the world's most famous living Holocaust survivor, teenage deportee to concentration camps, death camps and all that, Nobel Peace Prize winner and author and educator himself of great renown. The other one was a self-portrait etching called The Boar's Head Dream. That had this, a self-portrait. My beard was black then, with this like boar's head coming out of my skull. It was kind of like a nightmarish thing. And you know, if you delve into the Holocaust in whatever form, it's a nightmare in a way. Its history is it's horrible. And years later, when I began the Under the Wings of God series, I sought to do something that would not be horrible, that would be accessible. And that, you know, people hear the word Holocaust and they run away. I know Jewish people who don't want to see Schindler's List, the movie, for example, because it's so hard to deal with.
Yes,
so in my own art, much of the work I've done, especially in the Under the Wings of God series, I've intentionally made accessible to children, teenagers, youth, young adults, and so on. That's been like a major focus for me.
Excellent. So the Under the Wings of God series, do you still think that very well conveys the Holocaust message, even though it's still, you know, more accessible to everybody? Are you happier with that in that sense?
I'm happier in terms of how I've sought to portray victims of the genocide by the Nazis and fascists in Europe. Many other artists have depicted the Holocaust in different times, including victims, artists, many of whom perished, some of whom survived, and frequently Holocaust art portrays the horrors of war and genocide in brutal and very difficult ways. So I accept that. That's how other artists have done that. My own thinking has been to, again, do this in a more accessible way, which to me doesn't mean it has to diminish the horrors of what happened. The works are inherently sad. I portray people, as you saw in the PowerPoint earlier, as they looked in real life, and I've drawn wings from actual birds' wings on them, so it's a metaphor. And the accessibility, I think, is what makes the work unique. aside from the fact that I like to believe that the art is good art, of course.
Yes, definitely. So, one of the major Holocausts that we're all aware about, in the period of the war, Second World War, etc. That kind of happened over in Europe. So, did you go on excursions and trips abroad to places then to kind of get an experience of what it was like there at the time?
Well, in some ways, it's impossible to. You can learn about things that happened. I was born 5 years after World War II ended in 1950. You can, certain movies, books, hearing Holocaust survivors speak can offer tremendously useful lessons. What I think is impossible for us to do is to put ourselves in the shoes of the people who were there at the time. And we also don't know how we would have reacted to certain situations. So I like to think that that both people who were targeted as victims as well as other people who, let's say if any of us had been born, let's say in 1920 or 30 as opposed to 1950 or 1980 or 2000, we would have done the right thing. So I've spent 2 summers in Poland and a few weeks in the autumn of one of those years in the mid-1980s. So I visited places around Poland which impacted me tremendously and profoundly, which Poland is the world's largest Jewish graveyard in a way. It's also an unconsecrated one because millions of the victims were gassed and incinerated and their ashes weren't buried according to proper religious dictates. Over 1 million Jews in the East, like in the Western Soviet Union, were shot to death by these killing squads. You can actually be all around Europe in different places and go through or see remnants of pre-World War II Jewish life. So, and those visits, went to Vienna, 1999. I was in Rome 2 years ago for a few days, and it's hard to go anywhere actually in Europe where Jews, as were also Romani and Sinti, the gypsy peoples, where they weren't like rounded up, targeted for death, arrested, and deported to camps all over. So
and this incorporation of the fact that it's not just the Jews, it is the gypsies as well, kind of is displayed in the whole philosophy behind your general human rights art as well, isn't it?
Right, and one of the things I like to point out is that the Holocaust was not just the murder of, it's a huge number, staggering, impossible to assimilate numbers. It was not just the murder of 6 million Jews, 500,000 Romani and Sinti peoples. Before they began the final solution, it's called the final solution to the Jewish problem, which is the genocide against the Jews. The Nazis murdered 250,000, 250,000 physically and mentally disabled Protestant and Catholic Austrians and Germans. That it wasn't just Hitler, it took thousands of people to enable this to happen, including people who could have and should have spoken out against it. And because they didn't, which is what the crisis is for me today, when I talk about what the usefulness of Holocaust education is today for preventing other genocides as they happen, is the tremendous need for people to speak out and not be silent. If you're silent, you're like complicit in allowing crimes to happen. So
much of your work focuses on the Warsaw ghettos.
Some of it, yes.
Can you tell us kind of a bit about that and where that kind of came from?
Well, I visited Warsaw in 1984 and 85. Actually, I went to this plaza, both trips, going to study summer studies in Poland, and there's a Warsaw Ghetto monument, which was a sculpture, I don't know if it was 1950s or early 60s. I didn't know until years later that underneath the pavement where this plaza is, there are like the bones of thousands of Jews who died in the ghetto during the final destruction in April-May 1943, during the time that's known as the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which was also like the liquidation and destruction of the last remaining Jews at the time. So the Under the Wings of God series began when I had taken a book out of the public library called The 45th Anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. It has all these black and white photographs, very grainy, and I was kind of mesmerized. They're kind of like what I call like movie stills, except they weren't from movies. They were real life photographs, many taken by Nazi soldiers, one in particular, who had gone into the ghetto on his birthday and took all these photos. And I did a drawing one day of this one photograph of this trolley car that was in the Warsaw Ghetto. You can see three men in the front of the trolley, like a driver, a conductor, and a passenger, with a Star of David armband on his upper arm, and that particular drawing in late '91 began what became the series, which basically has been evolving ever since, over 20 years long now.
So it's still something that a series that you're continuing at the moment?
Initially I had planned the series to be 50 works, and I would have it planned to do it by the end of spring of 1993, and timed, as my original intent, to time it, the completion of 50 works, with when the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum was set to open in April 1943 to commemorate the then 50th anniversary of the uprising. But here it is 20 years later. I'm in the 21st year working on the series, and there's I think 57 works completed, 3 in progress, and more planned. So it's open-ended. I may be working on it over the next 10 or 15 years, however long I live.
Mm-hmm. And when Mr. Lynch, our school rector, had introduced us both at the beginning of this interview,
yes,
it was mentioned that you've been at the school for 5 years now. How do you feel that students, when you go to visit schools, not just ours but all of them, how do you feel they respond to your work and what you're doing? What's their reaction to that?
That's hard for me to say on one level. Some audiences can be shyer and more reserved. That happens to be the case in Scotland. American school kids or students, pupils, are more a little more outgoing in some ways. Sometimes I know I've done really well, and it's also happened in Scotland as well as in the States. A student will come up to me afterwards and they'll personally thank me or shake my hand. That's always enormously gratifying to me. When some pupils will come up after and say, "Thank you for what you've done, thank you for the presentation, for your art," and so on. So I know that I've made an impact on at least a few kids. I mean, on a very fundamental level, if I feel as if I can keep one youngster from getting involved like with a hate group, and there's like thousands of hate organizations on the internet, Holocaust denial websites, some of which I find really, they're all appalling, then I'll feel as if I've accomplished something. Just keeping one pupil from getting involved with some racist skinhead group or something, then my work is validated for me.
Excellent. So, it's good to know that, pupils you feel have, are impacted by your work, and they thank you in that respect.
I hope so. Some of them don't thank me, and I just can, I hope I've made an impact and I've influenced them, especially the younger ones. Personally, I think that the most useful audience for the type of tolerance education that I do is pupils ages like 5, 6, 7, 8.
Right.
Children inherently don't know hate.
Yes.
You can have kids of all different ethnic, racial, religious, national backgrounds playing together, but when kids are teens, they learn prejudice, stereotypes, hate from either older teens or adults, which is an interesting phenomenon that happens. And stereotyping and this kind of prejudice leads to violence and leads to hate attacks, which have happened wherever, United States, Canada, Britain, Australia, or throughout Europe and so on.
So with that in mind then, have you yourself ever experienced any kind of events within, hate groups or racism or these kind of acts in society, in your own life, in your own experiences?
Oh, I have, unfortunately, in some ways that may be viewed as controversial by some, proselytizing to me is a form of hate. When people of one religion tell someone of another religion that their religion is inferior, has been replaced by a newer, superior religion. And this happens a lot among people who proselytize believing that their faith is superior. And it happens worldwide among proponents of certain theological views of certain religions. And I always feel, and someone tells me that I need to be saved, for example, and I have my own religion, I have my own background, I always feel it's like I've been punched in the stomach or like I'm kicked while lying on the ground. That's how the emotional response is. So unfortunately, almost every religion I can think of has kind of ideological extremists and people who use their religion to promote unjustifiable acts, which, and in terms of contemporary human rights abuses, genocides, atrocities, and conflict resolution, that type of thinking leads, unfortunately, to a lot of violence in the world. It's like the quote I had from Elie Wiesel at the beginning of my PowerPoint, that no human race is superior, no religion is superior, and that people who claim that their religion is the only way, it's like a racist sort of way to promote one's views.
Which is something that in your art you try and kind of convey against the superiority, don't you?
Well, I'm trying to convey the notion that that everyone is entitled to their own beliefs, and it runs into a contradiction in some ways when you have certain faiths which believe that theirs are theologically superior. So so it's a problem. I mean, even both within Christianity and Islam, there are people who believe that their religions are the only way. Well, and Jews have been victimized through much of the 2,000-year-long history of Christianity. Yet, ironically enough, in today's conflicts worldwide, if I look at any number of them, Northern Ireland was when you had Catholics and Protestants killing each other, civilians among them. Kashmir, Sri Lanka, Israel and the Palestinians. You have people on both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict who engage in supremacist thinking, and people killing each other completely needlessly, which doesn't actually lead to a solving of the land-based conflict nature of the conflicts themselves.
Yes.
It leads to a lot of unnecessary bloodshed and pain and suffering.
So do you think then, in that respect, that through your art, through the work that you do, that people have kind of learned their lesson, if you will, from the Holocaust and what you convey in your work?
Whether they're learning or not, I don't know. I'm offering my work as a one small way to kind of promote tolerance and a kind of what I see as universal lessons to be had from the genocide and persecution of people based on their race, ethnicity, faith, whatever. I have to say that there's a lot of idealism that goes with this type of education, because conflicts continue on today. Nonetheless, the necessity for it is overwhelming, specifically because there are so many conflicts continuing on today.
So do you think that there's a specific painting or a poem or a book that's been, worked on by somebody who really kind of conveys and portrays the whole horror of the Holocaust and these kind of racist acts and the fascist groups that are out there?
Well, there are many people who have addressed the Holocaust, for example. In art, there are other artists who've addressed other atrocities like the Armenian genocide, and Khmer Rouge in Cambodia and so on. In recent years. So in terms of the Holocaust specifically, there are scores of survivor memoirs and even writings by Jews who perished, as well as art not only done by survivors, but children of survivors, and there's a whole other category. I'm not a child of survivors, but I did lose specific relatives. empathizers, people who may not even be Jewish, who have addressed
Yes.
the Holocaust in art or in film or literature and so on.
So is it nice for you to see that these issues are being addressed through other, other mediums such as film,
Absolutely,
etc.?
yeah.
I think the last thing that I'd like to ask you in this interview today would be, for you and your personal opinion, what is the particular power between the art in today's society and what you're doing that gives across your message?
Did you say power? What is the particular power?
Yeah, so, yeah. So what kind of do you think is the key aspect within your artwork, if you will, that really draws people in to kind of relay this message?
Well, in my art, I think using the Under the Wings of God series and some of the drawings in my companion human rights series called Sightseeing with Dignity, also includes depiction of at least I think one or two of them have where I've drawn wings as a metaphor for flight. So I think that accessibility draws people in if they see the work on the internet or in an exhibit or in a PowerPoint presentation like I would do in a school, for example, that the depiction of the victims with wings offers that accessibility that makes the otherwise incomprehensible nature of 6 million Jews murdered or 500,000 gypsies. It's impossible. I can't comprehend 10,000 people murdered in some war, much less 6 million.
Because these are colossal numbers
so
of
just
certainly.
Portraying, let's say, like, of the 57 works that are completed in my series, some of them depict 2 or 3 people. So let's say I've depicted 75, 80 people. Well, 80 people looked at in an exhibit or an online portrayal is a lot easier to assimilate. So,
right, yes.
yeah. So in that sense, I think that I like to think that my work has an impact and will continue to be seen by more people, both online and in actual exhibits and galleries and so on. So maybe in a book down the road.
So not only is your work conveying a very important message, but it's very contemporary with this metaphor of the wings, isn't it, really?
Well, also the companion Sightseeing with Dignity series portrays victims of some very contemporary, recent years events, very post World War II.
Right.
That kind of, for me, brings it into more contemporary usefulness for students today, pupils for whom World War II is like ancient history.
Yeah.
The Vietnam War is ancient history. When that was going on, I was in high school, but I got out of high school in 1968. That's already like a long time ago.
Yeah.
As recent as World War II is and was in terms of, let's say, like recent European, Western, or world civilization history, because of so many things change and new generations come, it's also, again, like ancient history at the same time. So whatever can be done to make it relevant, I think, is useful.
Well, I thank you very much for your
you.
time, Akiva, and I think it's been a pleasure to have you with us, and once again a great honour for you to share your messages with the high school students. So
thank you for your excellent questions, astute questions, and
thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you once again. Thank you.